The subject of this particular gathering this weekend is a very, very important as well as interesting one. In every plus in human relations, there's also a minus. Every strength has its own, just as, of course, the opposite is true. We have found in the progress of science great strength in developing our resources, great strength in developing our understanding of the universe, great strength in some ways in understanding ourselves. But there has been a built-in weakness in this whole approach also, in that because we have used science in a particular way, we've become committed to the extension of that development. Because science has been a rational tool, we have become more and more committed to the thought that if we are really to understand what life is like, what the universe is all about, and what our place is in the general scheme of things, that we must be purely rational in this approach, almost as if any other kind of approach would have to be considered irrational. In this kind of a scheme, it's difficult to fit religion, and yet the effort needs to be made, and the effort is being made. And yet we find in this effort that religion too seems to be reduced to mere abstractions. What about love? Well, we just speak of God as the cosmic love of the universe and so on. We get these long, rational explanations of what it is that don't give us one iota of feeling of love, rather that seem to take away some of that feeling. We talk of joy, but it's a meaningless term when you speak of reason. I found a very interesting thing when traveling around the world, that people in, whether you would call it primitive societies or at least very simple societies, are far more capable of certain deep intuitions that are more rightly called the ground of religion than the people of this country. It's as if too much reason deadened our religious sensitivity, deadened our capacity for spiritual perception. As if those countries that were not so committed to a scientific insight into things are able to get true insights into truth also, into deeper truths, that we are not capable of receiving in our strictly reasonable society. There's one thing wonderful said in that delightful book, The Morning of the Magicians, about these very simple, primitive people who didn't have any of our sophisticated gadgetry. And this one woman, when her husband was off shopping and she wanted to get word to him about something else that he was supposed to get, she would go down to the tree at the bottom of their garden and call him. And this anthropologist investigating this phenomenon said, "But why a tree?" And she said, "Well, sir, you see, it's because we're poor and we can't afford telephones." People, the trouble with a line of reasoning is that it's exclusive. It's very good in its own direction, but it excludes the possibility of other directions. It excludes the possibility of other lines of development, which in their own way may be quite as valid. You start reasoning from this step to that step to the other step to the other step. By the time you've held all these stages together, by the time you've gone through all the hard work necessary in order to reach your final stage, you really don't have much patience with people who come along and say, "Yeah, but we could have done it this way." Scientists are supposed to be non-dogmatic, but the fact is that science is becoming another kind of religion too, with its own dogmas, with its own bigotry. There is a scientist called Velikovsky. I suppose a lot of you have heard of him. He's come up with some really far-out theories, and I think that the theories are not true. I've studied various evidence one way and another, which makes me think that although it's interesting, it isn't valid. It may be valid, it may not be valid. That isn't the real point. The point is that he's thinking in a way that isn't accepted by modern scientists. And because he's doing that, any number of scientists wrote Macmillan publishers who published Velikovsky's books and told them that they would boycott their publishing house if they didn't stop publishing Velikovsky's books. I don't see much difference between that and the kind of bigotry in religion that science has scoffed at for such a long time. Anytime you get any new thing that any system that becomes institutionalized, you develop dogmas, you develop rigidity, you develop exclusiveness. And in this way, we have to see the subject of science and religion from two standpoints. The one is that religion has tended to become, in our day and age, more and more open to the possibilities of science. Science itself has become more and more open to the possibilities of religious experience. But on the other hand, each is hurting the other. We need to see how they can help each other and get away from those ways in which they can hurt each other. The way in which they are hurting each other is, A, that religion is thinking that if it's going to become scientific, if it's going to take the good that science has to give it, it's got to leave out all those mystical realities that are properly the field of religion, and to be strictly rationalistic. And science, on the other hand, is taking all too many lessons, I think, from religion in its dogmatism, in its institutionalized concepts and hypotheses, and giving less and less leeway to the individual eccentric. I think it's delightful that there are a few people who come up with ideas that seem absolutely far-stretched, because at least it stretches the mind. I think it was Babcock who said that in the last half of the 20th century, man would be turning more and more toward the mystery of man. That science itself would become more concerned with man than it is only with objective phenomena. His prediction seems to be coming true. More and more we find people today thinking in terms of what's going on inside ourselves. From several standpoints. One is that we've exhausted a great deal of potentials out there. The other is that whatever you can see of the universe around you depends upon how good your instruments are. Whatever you can understand or master, again, depends upon how good your tools are. And we're beginning to understand that ultimately the tool that we are working with is our own selves. Not just your eyes. You can always get a telescope and see a lot farther if you've got eyes that can see at all. But your brain. We're beginning to understand that with an inefficient brain, we can have all the facts in the universe at our fingertips and still not understand a one of them. That when your nervous system and your brain can think clearly, you may be able to come up with answers with a great paucity of facts, where a great many facts wouldn't give you very much understanding if your brain was clouded. In our country, I think more than in any other country, we are still a bit too fact-oriented. Anytime there's a desire to arrive at some new insight, they get fact-finding committees. They think that if they know many more things, that they will be wiser. When you come on college campuses particularly, you see written in the faces of all too many students and faculty members this kind of thought that I am so and so wise because I have read X number of books. What are these people to say when they get in a new situation? There is a story in India that they tell on this subject of a philosopher who was learned in the 4 Vedas who wanted to cross the Ganges in a boat. And since he was going across and had no one else to talk to, he said to the boatman, "Tell me, have you read the first of the Vedas?" And the boatman said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I have not had time to read any Vedas. I haven't had time to read. I'm just busy supporting my family." And the philosopher very proudly said, "Well, In that case, I'm sorry to say that a quarter of your life is as good as lost. Well, the boatman swallowed this insult calmly, and after a little bit, the philosopher could think of nothing else to say. It seems to me that the more people have of knowledge, the more they want to display that knowledge. It becomes only a means of feeding their egos. So he said, "Tell me, my good man, have you read the second of the 4 Vedas?" And this boatman indignantly said, "Sir, I told you I haven't had time to do any reading at all. I've been busy just earning a living for my family." And the philosopher very superciliously said, "In that case, I'm sorry to say that a half of your life is as good as lost." Well, all of a sudden, there came a great storm, and the boat began tossing and churning in these great waves, and the boatman, over the loud noise of the wind, shouted to the philosopher, "My learned philosopher, knower of the 4 Vedas, tell me, you've asked me 2 questions, now I'd like to ask you 1. Can you swim?" The philosopher said, "No, I can't swim. I've been too busy reading." The boatman said, "Well, I'm very sorry to inform you that unless some miracle happens, 100% of your life will very soon be lost." The boatman was able to swim to shore when the boat capsized, but the philosopher drowned. All that ponderous learning gave him weight, made him too heavy, and he sank. So it is that we need to learn how to swim through the trials of life. We need to learn to resolve our own inner complexes, our frustrations, how to fulfill our desires, and so on. All of these things are beginning to become the interest of science, because science is understanding that only to the extent that we've got ourselves together can we get other things together. I knew a man who, I think he had an 8th grade education, no more than that. But he was a millionaire. He didn't know very much, but he could use what he knew. By contrast, I know people who know a great deal of facts, who somehow can't even hold a job. Somehow you ask them questions, and they don't know how to put those things together because they've got so much information that it's all scrambled. It becomes more and more clear as we develop in our civilization that the ultimate tool is man. The ultimate scientific precision instrument is man. And if we can get this brain concentrated, if a student, I remember a college exam that I took many years ago, there was this absurd song that came out during the war when I was in college. Would you rather be a colonel with an eagle on your shoulder than a private with a chicken on your knee? And why this silly song got into my head, I don't know. But I know that it was too much there to drive out it was so strongly there that these questions on the exam wouldn't drive it out. And here I was trying to answer all these questions, and would you rather be a colonel with an eagle on your shoulder? Get out of my mind! Or a private with a chicken? Get out! And I just couldn't get my mind onto that exam. How very much this is a part of the problem of human life in all its departments. There was a movie that was put out in France a few years ago of a trial. I believe it was called The Trial, but I'm not sure. And it showed each of the jurors going to the court. And one of them, just before he left his home, got into a fight with his wife. And another one, his child got sick and he had to get him to the hospital. And another one had some trouble with some neighbor. And each one had some little problem. And then it showed them sitting there in the juror's box, listening to the pleas, pro and con in this case. A man's life was at stake. And then it showed, by flashback methods, the concerns that each of these jurors had. They were with a part of their mind listening to the case, and with about 90% of their mind worrying about how am I going to make up with my wife, or I hope my child's all right in the hospital, or I hope that I don't lose my job, or all these different things. How very little of our minds are really at our disposal. People would like to be able to put their minds 100% on what they're doing, whether it be in studies, whether it be in business, whether it be in anything. But the fact is that we're using about 7% of our potential brain power. And the rest of it is being scattered in many directions, not even conscious. Not even conscious. It may be some little thing that you don't know quite what it is that's nagging at you, but some little subconscious desire. And actually, we have to say that whether we are conscious of them or not, even to the point where we know that we may not know that there's something nagging at us, and yet we know that we can't somehow put our minds wholly on what we're doing. It's because of these energy drains of all these other thoughts, these desires, these complexes, these unfulfilled ambitions, and so on. All of these things show how very important it is that we develop man and not only develop our knowledge of the universe around us. A man was a doctor. He was a doctor in India who knew the old-fashioned system of medicine there. He had retired, he was an old man, but a friend of his was lying apparently on his deathbed, and the doctors had told him that he had only about 2 hours to live. And this friend, this retired, old-fashioned doctor, came to visit him. And from across the room he took one look at him, and by the color of his skin he said, "There's nothing wrong with you, all you need is a little yogurt." And these other skilled physicians they couldn't suppress their merriment over this absurd analysis of somebody who was on his deathbed. All he needs is yogurt. And they thought, well, he's getting senile, and anyway, they could not respect what he was saying at all. But they knew that there was no hope for the man, and this doctor insisted that he take some yogurt. So they said, "Sure, go ahead," and they left. The man took yogurt and sat up about half an hour later completely well. He just had some little thing wrong with his digestion, and it was enough to kill him, and the yogurt was enough to cure him. But here this man with a little bit of insight, intuitive insight into that person, was able to see what these doctors with all their much more sophisticated modern learning couldn't tell. This was told to me by a doctor, an Indian doctor friend of mine. So it is that we've come to an understanding that brings about a meeting like this, where we begin to see how can we bring science and religion together in a good way, not in a dogmatic way, not to make religion more cold or science more dogmatic, but to bring out in religion the emphasis on experience as the test of reality and not just dogmatism, and to bring out in science, I hope, a little bit of conscience, a little bit of feeling that there must be human values, that we're not just talking in terms of abstractions, but that we're thinking in terms of a universe that can be meaningful to us. But because of our scientific bias, our emphasis has been so far on a rather too rationalistic approach to truth. As we develop this mind through yoga practice, through learning how to concentrate, through making the nervous system very peaceful and calm so that it can react properly and instantly to any particular situation, stimulus, need for information, whatever. As we do all of that, I find that this other aspect is being starved. We still seem to think that if we are really to be religiously scientific and scientifically religious, that to talk in terms of those qualities that are rightfully the part of mystical experience, joy, love, simplicity of heart, faith, these things are sort of not a part of the modern vocabulary. We don't think of God as a person or as an infinite consciousness that can take personal interest in us. We think of him as some sort of abstract cosmic ground of being. Kind of hard to love something like that. We think of God as something that couldn't possibly be really able to respond personally and directly to us. And we become rather too cold in our philosophy. The practice of yoga, in fact the very definition of yoga, yogas chitta vritti nirod, means the neutralization of the waves of consciousness, of feeling. to make your mind and feelings completely calm so that you can be a precision instrument in the true way of being able to reflect purely without any kind of ripple or distortion in your own consciousness, without any bias of desire, to be able to reflect exactly what reality is, but to assimilate it on a level of consciousness that can give us some kind of feedback of understanding and not merely reflecting facts. This is a part of the purpose of yoga. But the interesting thing is that those who have practiced yoga and have achieved this state of absolute calmness are not like sort of human zombies. People seem to think that once you develop that state, that you become like another telescope. That if you read science fiction books, for example, you find that anybody who is very highly advanced in his ability to perceive truth always seems to be sort of a walking automaton. People ask him questions and he gives the answer like that. But anything childlike, anything sweet, anything humble, anything full of joy and spontaneity and tenderness and devotion and love, all of these things are considered a part of human fallibility. Yoga, in talking about the need to neutralize not just consciousness but feeling, shows that there is a difference between emotion and feeling. We've tended to think that if we're going to understand the universe with a mind that's clear, we've got to become absolutely free from all feeling. We've got to become like sort of a mechanism. Sort of like this young man who wanted, a terrible story, but a true one, came out when I was in college or something. He wanted to prove to himself that he was absolutely scientific and absolutely unmoved by any emotion. And so he killed his parents with cyanide and sat there and watched them writhe to death and felt so proud of himself that he was not touched. He thought, now I'm no longer a human being, I'm just a pure scientist. Well, he was only mad, that's all. But I remember also a man in college who was very philosophical, and he prided himself on the fact that he had a very unusually small heart. He thought that probably indicated that he didn't have much feeling, and therefore to that extent he was wise. And we don't understand that while emotion is distorting to our image, when we feel excited or depressed and so on, we don't see things clearly. People don't understand that a calm feeling is very, very intuitive and can understand things very quickly and can cut many corners in our arrival at truth. Now we're beginning to understand that man is a twofold nature. We've discovered that the brain has two halves, that the left half of the brain is rationalistic, but the right half of the brain is more feeling, more intuitive. If you look at people's eyes, you know the right half of the brain controls the left half of the body, the left half of the brain controls the right half of the body. If you study people's eyes sensitively and deeply, you'll observe that the right eye, controlled by the rational left half of the brain, reflects a person's reason. You can see his clarity of mind by looking into the right eye. You can see how intelligent he is. You can see how dispassionate he is, and so on. Look into the left eye, you'll see very much a person's intuitive and feeling quality, whether he's emotional, whether he's completely dead in his feeling, whether he has very deep feeling but calm. All these things are shown in the eyes if you look very sensitively. But we have both. And if we really are to become a precision instrument, we have to use what we've got. We cannot just use half of our nature, or I think it's a lot less than half if we just become rational, because even our rational nature has many, many levels. To become intuitive as well as rational, to become feeling as well as rational, to be able to express on many, many different levels and understand that this too is a part of our perception of reality. It's as if we didn't have eyes, we would say reality is only sound, but it's sight also. It's feeling, it's hearing, it's seeing, it's colors, and all these different sensations. Similarly, to get a full picture of the universe, we have to say this, that if I am capable of joy, then joy is a fact of the universe. If it weren't, I wouldn't be capable of it. And if joy is a fact of the universe, then why don't I explore that reality to its ultimate depths? Now, to come back to these yogis who have practiced this science, some of them have been very rational in their approach, because we have to explore our nature as it is, and some people are more automatically rational than others. So it is that I know certain yogis who didn't approach their yoga practice in a religious way at all. By that I mean they weren't devotional, they never sang chants, they never really thought in terms of God as a loving friend or all these things that are very dear to other people on the spiritual path, but who thought only in rather abstract terms. Shivoham, I am Shiva, I am Brahman, I am the infinite. And they tried to dissolve this sense of ego into that abstract and impersonal vision. And this was most attractive to them. So, people who didn't have a bias towards these qualities that I'm talking about at all. And yet, once they attained that vision, the interesting thing is that they became so absolutely full of joy and of all these qualities that we think of as purely human. But to them they weren't purely human, because they realized then that joy too is a fact of the universe. And that's why when Buddha came into this world, he used to tell people, don't think about God, because, in those days people were asking God to do everything for them, practically feed them, So he said, don't think about God, because he was trying to tell people what you do is important. How you act is what's going to help you. If you just sit around and wait for God to help you all the time, like this one disciple of my guru. He was always very restless, telling jokes and keeping people in a state of lightness of mind when they were trying to get deeper into meditation. So my guru said to him, you ought to be more calm and not just always be joking. He was for laughter, but not constant. Have real joy, otherwise joking is just sort of a false stimulant. So this disciple said to my guru, but sir, I want to change, but how can I do it without your blessings? My guru said, well, my blessings are there already. God's blessings are there already. It's your blessings that are lacking. And so often we find that people are thinking God's going to do the whole work for them, and their own blessings are what is going to do it if they understood right. So Buddha taught this, and as a result, many of his disciples thought that there is no God. That wasn't Buddha's meaning. And so Swami Shankaracharya came sometime later to try to help people to understand, no, there is God, but he's not just blue and plays a flute or something very personal. God is an infinite consciousness. And so Shankaracharya, who actually was one of the great Gyan avatars, or incarnations of wisdom as they call them in India, a man of his whole thing was the abstract, impersonal aspect of God. But he too said that God can best be defined as Satchidanandam, existence, consciousness, bliss, or to put it in a way that we can grasp more easily, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. Bliss is the underlying reality of the universe. It isn't as if the farther a person advances spiritually, the farther he advances, the more cold he becomes, the more incapable of feeling, the more incapable of relating to the sufferings and joys of humanity. Rather, among all those souls that I have met who have achieved what we would call the divine vision, I have seen that they were the most perfect in their joy, the most perfect in their compassion, the most perfect in their ability to relate to people on all different levels, so that if a child broke a toy, they wouldn't be sitting there like an abstract oracle saying, that toy too is Brahman, like this. And child of 3 years old says, well, what are you talking about, On the contrary, those people can enter into it with the child and grieve with the child, and then say, well, now look, I'll make you a better toy. And they sit down, and just like children. I had a very amazing experience with my guru when I was new in the ashram there, because I had been brought up in Western intellectualism. And I had the image that a wise man, the wiser a man, the more he becomes very abstract, sort of like the vision, the popular image of Jesus Christ, who seems to be, in this image, sort of like a wooden Indian. You can never imagine him smiling. You can never imagine him laughing. You just think of him sort of turning away in pained dismay when somebody tells a joke. And all you sort of think of is this, like a voice from the tomb. Lo, I am with you always. And you go to any movie about Jesus, and each one seems worse than the one before it, I think, as the image gradually builds up of a man who never smiled, never laughed, always was sort of pained for the sins of the world. Can you imagine following a man like that? You just don't want to be with somebody who's going to be constantly telling you how bad you are, do you? You'd like a little hope. I know there was this one boy in college. Fortunately, amusingly, fittingly, his name really was quite appropriate to his calling. He was called Lou Coffin. He would sit down on the edge of our beds after we'd had a quiet night on the town and look at us reproachfully and say, "The wages of sin is death," like this. We'd sort of turn away feeling slightly sicker than before, but it didn't enlighten us, it didn't help us. So anyway, one gets this image of a great master as being somebody who can't be human, of a wise man, of somebody who's always going to be talking in terms of algebraic formulae or something. And so I was new in this ashram, and I could see that my guru was in this image too. He was very, very distant in a sense. The paradoxical distant closeness of omnipresence is the way he put it once. So we were out at the desert, and he had somebody turn the light out. And I thought, well, what great lesson am I going to learn now? And then I heard this crinkling of a bag and a little chuckle. I thought, well, okay, some new experience. Suddenly, you know these little guns that send off sparks when you suddenly, bzz, bzz, bzz. And here he was shooting off a little Christmas toy he'd been given. And then he turned the light on, and he had a little gun that shot a stick of wood up that had a parachute tied to it, and then it came down, this parachute. And he was having the best time of his life, and he looked at me and he said, "How do you like it?" And I was just trying to get over this surprise, and I said, "Well, they're fine, sir, I guess." And then he looked at me very deeply. He said, "Suffer little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of God." And this is how he was. He could be a child with children. He could be a wise man with wise men. He could be just so compassionate with people who felt sorrow for anything. He could be, when he was with women, he was just like a woman. When he was with men, he was just like a man. When he was with any group of people, he was with them. To the extent that sometimes people who were experts in fields that he didn't even know, like doctors, would come. And he would talk medicine with them as if he'd been going through the whole course himself. He knew everything they knew, and he could talk on their level. But he talked in such a way as always to make you feel that he was one with you, not as if he was up there sort of broadcasting the message of doom to the universe or something. This is what I have observed in every one of the great masters that it has been my privilege to meet. And while when I go to so many churches and religious gatherings, I find people with pinched lips and looking down at the ground like this and sort of as if they had just swallowed a very bitter grapefruit or something. That doesn't draw me to religion. It was because of people like that I tried everything else possible before I realized that everything was a dead end except religion. But I really gave it a try, all-out effort. Science, philosophy, travel, art, and literature, God knows what else. I was into all these different things thinking that I know what I want is God, but I don't think it's possible to find God, because all the people in religion that I've ever met were people who didn't have any sense of the things that I consider valid in life, which are joy and love and an ability to really relate to the universe. All it seems to have done is to make them look like prunes or something. And it was only when I realized that every one of these things was a dead end that I finally said, well, okay, maybe nobody's ever sought God before. Maybe I'm mad. But I might as well be sincere about it and go ahead and be mad, if that's the solution. I saw no other way out. And that's when I came upon Autobiography of a Yogi. And through that book, met my guru. and through my guru came to realize what religion really is all about. That the science of religion is a very valid term. The title, of a book that he wrote, in fact. The science of religion basically is related to what man wants. It's interesting to know that the universe, that this galaxy has 100 billion stars and that there may be 100 billion galaxies. And it's interesting to know that the sun is composed of such and such elements. And it's interesting to know that water acts in such and such a way as not to sink to the ground, to the floor of the ocean as it freezes, but that of all elements, water is the only one that doesn't contract immediately but expands when it freezes, when it turns solid. Other things contract. If water did that, we'd have a frozen planet. It's interesting to know so many little facts of nature, some seeming almost as if there was some plan going on, like this one relating to water. But these things are only interesting, and you get enough of these facts and you begin to say, but my God, okay, but what does it mean to me? I don't care how many stars there are if I can't eat. I want to know what's going to help me get what I want. And there comes a time in the lives of the life of every man, whether he be scientist or religious man or anything, there comes a point where he says, God, more facts, take them away. I don't want all that stuff. I want certain things that I'm not getting. I want joy. I want to get away from suffering. I want to understand not just what's going on over there in China. I want to know what's going wrong with me. Why is it that I can't feel happy when I get up in the morning? Why is it that I'm getting more and more tired all the time? Why is it that I can't get along with my wife? Why is it that I'm not... I know when I was seeking in this way, I went up to upstate New York. I thought maybe what was wrong with me was that I was living in the city and I needed to get away in the country. And I would get out there and I would see the sunlight shimmering on a dewdrop, on a pine needle. And I would say in my mind, that's beautiful. And my heart would say, yes, but you can't feel its beauty. You're only like an engine with an 8-cylinder engine and you're working on one cylinder. You can sense that sunrise is a beautiful sunrise, but can you enter into it? Can you really feel so identified with it that you're not thinking 1,000 other thoughts too? Can you really feel this universe as it is? And I had to say, no, I can't. There's something wrong here. I don't have what I want. And it isn't enough for me to know what makes a rainbow. I want to be able to feel the enjoyment of that beauty that made me interested in the rainbow in the first place. And all of these come back to the simple fact that what man really wants is not just information. What man wants is twofold. He wants to get away from suffering, and he wants to find joy. And this is the science of man. And this is the rightful interest of man. And it isn't enough that science, now that it's becoming interested in religion, is turning to find out how the mind works and how the nervous system functions and these various superficial things. Until we come to grips with these seemingly subjective issues, but nonetheless the most important issues where we are concerned, we won't have really satisfied ourselves. We want joy. And until we have it, we're not going to be content. We want to get to that state of mind which isn't just numb in its refusal to accept suffering, but which has so much insight that it can't suffer. It isn't that you're not willing or able to face realities. So many people don't suffer merely because they don't let themselves feel. They just paralyze their feelings. But you feel deeply on such a level that everything is joy, and you're able to share with other people on that level. You're able to help people compassionately. It isn't as if you just sort of sit there hugging yourself, giggling in a corner. I don't mean that kind of joy, but a kind of expansive joy that seeks to give to other people. When you have suffering in your heart, you're not going to be helping other people. I know Jean-Paul Sartre said that in this world that bleeds, all joy is obscene. This is one of the most obscene remarks I've ever read. Because when people are sitting suffering, they're not interested in helping other people. But when they have true joy, pure joy, that's when compassion grows automatically. You see other people suffering and you say, oh, I want to help that person. I want him too to feel my joy. And in a sense you feel that your joy won't be perfect until they too have some of it, until they can be brought out of their tears of despair. So it is that the true science of religion should be concerned with this question of how can I find joy, how can I help other people to find joy in life? And the answer to that question is not to be found in what our civilization purports to give as an answer. What is it? One of these milk companies, Foremost or something, has an advertisement for ice cream that speaks of it as a half-gallon of happiness. An Indian friend of mine said, "You Americans pride yourselves on being the least superstitious people in the world. I can't imagine a greater superstition than this. Your delusion that makes you believe that you can get happiness out of inanimate objects." And yet we find on every billboard, wherever we travel, that we are being told that this kind of cigarette will make you happier than any other kind of cigarette, this kind of car will make you happier than any other kind of car, and all these various things, once you've got them, you'll be happy. Well, here we are, most of us have these things, and we're trying to find out how to become happy. It won't happen until you understand that you cannot get joy. You are joy. Your very nature is joy. It's a fact of your being. And what you need to do is expand that nature. Yoga practice, meditation, love of your fellow man, kind actions, actions that expand your consciousness rather than limit it selfishly to yourself and your own family. These all are aids to expand that which alone is really desirable to you, and therefore that which alone should be the real interest of science and religion. Ultimately, the purpose of all these studies is to improve the human lot. And if man himself wants these things, then that's what they should help us to get. I think that the future of both science and religion will take us in this direction. To understand that we are a part of that infinite vibration of joy that is the underlying reality of the universe. You don't get joy, you don't find joy, you expand a joy that is yourself already. To go into this more deeply is the subject of much teaching, not the subject of a brief talk like this. But I would say just briefly this, that if you can get your mind calm, if you can get your heart calm, if you can be impartial towards all, if you can have the right receptivity in your own mind, you don't have to whip yourself up into an attitude of joy. You will find that you have it already. You will find that it merely needs to be released from the prison in which you have kept it by misunderstandings, wrong attitudes, wrong actions, wrong directions of consciousness. God bless you.